Okay, hello. So this is part of the IAP's new interview series. We're speaking with experts on contemporary topics related to global news, security issues, peace and conflict resolution. And today we're speaking with Professor Heinz Gärtner, who'll be speaking on U.S. domestic and foreign policy in sort of a COVID-19 period. So Professor Gärtner, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So we'll start kind of coming from a foreign policy perspective. Could you start to speak a little bit on an international level? How do you perceive the role of the U.S. in the current pandemic, and how do you envision its role in a post-coronavirus era?
Historically, the U.S. always could take a lead in global crises. So when we look back to the American participation in the two world wars, and especially after 1947, when the US provided the Marshall Plan aid to European countries. So the US was able to build up a very positive narrative in this global crisis. And during the Cold War, the US took the lead in the confrontation between the West and the communist bloc. Of course, this image crumbled during the Vietnam War. However, after 9/11, the US could create another positive image and a global solidarity. However, this suffered already after the Iraq War in 2003. Now we have a global crisis again, and we have President Donald Trump in the White House. And Trump is about to abdicating this positive role, leading role of the US in a global crisis. So he mismanaged, of course, at home as well, this COVID-19 situation. He tried to cover it up, and he found scapegoats. He blamed the Chinese, he blamed the World Health Organization, blamed Obama, blamed the Democrats. So it was all kinds of excuses for his mismanagement. And so he's also abandoning multilateralism in the world. So at the same time, when we focus on this America first, he withdraw from multilateral organizations, international treaties. He is attacking right now the World Health Organization, but he did it in the past to the World Trade Organization, and attacking UNESCO. He left UNESCO, but also he left the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and withdraw from it was a bilateral treaty, nevertheless it was an international treaty, the Intermediate Range Missile Treaty, the INF treaty. So he is abandoning multilateralism. But that's what the Europeans hold dear. This effective multilateralism is something what the Europeans would support. And in the past, the Europeans followed the Americans more or less, followed the lead of the Americans more or less. But now they are losing, the Americans are losing this role and this positive image. And now we will have a world with increasing tensions internationally, with a polarization and without multilateralism. Of course, the post-corona world would be less globalized. There would be, it will be less open, more nationalism. Globalism will not go away, but especially the Americans, if Donald Trump will be re-elected. So, but in that case, of course, Donald Trump will focus more and more on the US only. The US and globally will be less prosperous. there will be less wealth in the US, but also in the world. But there will be also authoritarian tendencies in many countries. Many leaders will not return to normal democratic practices. They will keep many of the rules they introduced due to the corona crisis. And I suspect Donald Trump, if he is re-elected, will keep some of these measures, surveillance, for example, to after the corona crisis as well. So the US with Trump will be more inward-looking. The world will be more polarized, and the US will abdicate its leading role.
Okay, great. And so you spoke about sort of the Trump White House's approach toward, or kind of attack on multilateralism, and also its lack of support for its allies. I wonder, do you view there being as a coherent policy under the Trump administration to the current pandemic? And specifically, how have you viewed relations by the US today under Trump toward China specifically, and then maybe also towards the European Union in the current pandemic? Do you think there's been cooperation, antagonism? How would you characterize the current relations?
Trump increasingly is attacking China now. So he's blaming China for the virus. And there are two reasons for that. One is the US global role. So he is preparing for a superpower competition after the corona crisis. So he has in mind less of a cooperative multilateral world, but on a polarized world. And here China is his first opponent, the first enemy. So that will last way beyond the corona crisis, the corona world. The second reason why he attacks China is because he uses China for his campaign, domestic reason, and he wants to look strong on China, and at the same time he will paint his opponent from the Democratic Party as weak and soft on China. Unfortunately, Joseph Biden is now trying to compete with Trump on this China bashing, and in this case, Biden will not win against Trump. So Biden has to change his narrative and saying, with Trump, this relations with China will be even worse. So even they are bad now, they will be worse. But China bashing is not where Biden can beat Trump. So there's these global reasons why China comes to the center and to the fore now, but also the domestic reasons that Trump thinks China is a good campaign argument against Biden.
Okay, great. And so you've already kind of addressed also the domestic level, but turning more towards domestic foreign policy. How have you viewed Trump's response within the U.S. to the pandemic, and sort of how that, what factors in his response and also the response of the Democratic Party, in particular Biden, might be most decisive in the upcoming election? Do you think that that this is kind of looking more towards international relations or the economic situation or healthcare? Will any of these issues be more decisive than another?
Now the American electorate also found out that there was mismanagement on the side of Trump. At the beginning, Trump's approval rating increased, but now they are falling. So they're falling, and they're very low because now the Americans found out that Trump missed many opportunities and that he was informed about the pandemic already in mid-January, and more or less he ignored it, downplayed it. So Americans now think many thousands of American lives could have been saved if Trump has reacted earlier. So he is losing ground now because of the pandemic situation. And Biden is leading the opinion polls now in almost all areas concerning competencies of healthcare, even economy now, crisis management, infrastructure. So Biden is leading Trump, but that doesn't tell the whole story, because if you look at the enthusiasm of Biden supporters and Trump supporters, Trump supporters are enthusiastic about Trump twice as much as Biden supporters. So that would say that Biden supporters might not go to the elections. Now the elections will be difficult if they take place at all. Biden supporters, older people, they come from the African American community, but he has also the urban college educated, the support of the urban college educated people. So the youth was enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders. So the youth supported Bernie Sanders and not so much Biden. Bernie Sanders, of course, now endorsed Biden, but that does not mean that they will really vote for him. So there are many issues which Sanders, which now in the crisis seem even more important, many issues with Biden, about Sanders really focused on, and Biden will have to pick them up in order to get support of the younger people. So that's first of all, Medicare for all. So that's a health system which includes all, including a public option. That's not only private insurances. He should also pick up the Green New Deal, an idea by Sanders, so alluding to the New Deal after the economic crisis in 29 by Roosevelt. And also for students, it's important, and for young people, free tuition, free university without fees, which is very important for many families and young people. So Biden did not do this yet. And also Biden is not really visible now. So he didn't bring this message among his electorate yet, or the American people. So Trump is having a press briefing every afternoon. So a journalist would write about it every day. So he will copy what he's saying, and Biden is not really there yet. So he has to find a way that he will have his own press conferences, maybe not every day. He should have his own health experts with him. He should talk about the unemployed, the uninsured, which Donald Trump doesn't do that much because he thinks that everything will be great soon anyway. Biden should not talk to the CEOs, for example, on the great airlines. He should talk to the flight attendants, who lost their jobs now. So he should be much more outgoing, reaching out to the public. He's not doing this. He should pick up the issues which has been focused on by Sanders. So that's a little problem that even so Biden is leading the opinion polls right now, doesn't mean that he wins the election. It might well be that we will have the same situation as 2016, that Trump will win the delegates of states, and Biden might win the popular vote. And we do have this swing states which still Trump leaning, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So they are not given Democratic. So So that's several caveats for Biden now.
Right. Do you think there are any specific factors or scenarios that could prove to be most decisive in favoring either Biden or Trump? For instance, whether the health situation both in the US or the world deteriorates, or if there's a rapid economic recovery, or for instance, if unemployment continues to grow. Do you think any of these factors could impact one party more or the other, or do you think that it's too hard to predict at this point?
Biden should now focus on health. Health is an issue what is important for Democrats all along, already before the corona crisis. Unfortunately, the Democrats did not defend the Obamacare that much. So that's why they lost all this debate of the public options. But still they're focusing on healthcare. And healthcare, the Democrats are very strong. And healthcare now in the corona crisis, everybody finds out that an insurance for all would have been good. So that's, also the economic situation for Trump is now, Trump thought he would go to the elections with good economic data, even though they were not that good, because debt and budget deficits, they were very strong as higher than under the beginning, of the beginning of the Obama administration. But he said he would, with good unemployment data and with growth rates, he would go to the elections. That's not his asset anymore. So the Democrats should not exploit and saying that's we see Trump caused this economic crisis, but they say we have to have alternatives. Alternatives: Social Security, healthcare, jobs for the unemployed, at least temporary jobs for the unemployed. So that's what the Democrats could focus on. Trump will do his populist campaign. So he will find scapegoats. He will blame the Democrats for the current crisis. Internationally, he will play the China card. So he will have his supporters anyway. So it depends whether and according to polls, about 90% of those who voted for him would still again vote for him. So Biden cannot find voters in the Trump camp. So that's not what Biden should do. Biden should focus on his camp, on the democratic issues, and not get in a debate about who is strong against China, who is to blame for the current corona crisis. So Biden has to offer solutions for the uninsured, for the unemployed, for the young people. So that's what I do not see yet, that he is that good at that.
Mm-hmm. You spoke into the issues with the failings actually of the Trump administration, both in a domestic and international level, in responding to the current crisis. Do you view some of these issues as sort of a phenomenon of the current Trump administration, or do you think that this is kind of a long-standing trajectory? You mentioned, for instance, the Iraq War going back to 2003. Are these kind of revealing more structural issues within the U.S. or the U.S.'s role at international level, or do you think that this is something specific to the current administration?
I do think the Trump administration accelerated certain trends we had before. So that it's not really a phenomenon of the Trump administration, neither the domestic situation nor the international situation. Everything was there, but it was not that obvious yet. So the Trump administration made this crisis and this conflict situation more visible. So, and he's trying to exploit this. So he more or less is exploiting the trends which would help him in the campaign, which are not necessarily the trends which would offer a solution, whether domestically or internationally. So what is internationally would be the necessary, it would be multilateralism, it would be more globalization, at least in certain issues, cooperation among scientists, among academics. So that's happening now, but that's what basically would be a model for future cooperation. So not so much the big power competition, the big power conflict what Trump is focusing right now, but more the multilateral cooperation, but not only of governments and statesmen, stateswomen, but especially those people who are now the heroes of the current crisis. So that's what the alternative trend should be, and domestically for the US as well. There are many inequality in the US was there already before. So the Gini index of the economy were increasing actually under Trump. So the equality was a wrong narrative. There was not more equality under Trump. Now, of course, the crisis accelerated this inequality trend. So there are many groups which will feel abandoned. So there are groups what Trump promised them, nobody would be left behind. Now they are left behind. So these groups are might be the supporters now of the Democrats, and the Democrats should focus on them and not ignore that there are groups out there which maybe they in the past did not really pay attention that much.
Mm-hmm. And given kind of the challenges posed to multilateralism by the Trump administration, do you think that if the Democrats were to take the White House back in November, how much of that stuff do you think could be reversed in the short or long term, or are some of these things kind of hard to fix?
There will be changes, not dramatically, but there will be changes. So Democrats cannot. They will, to some extent, return to the Obama administration. There would be no revival of the Obama era, but Trump wanted to get rid of everything what Obama did. So he wanted to erase Obama's legacy from American history. So what the Democrats would do is, to some extent, go back to the Obama era, and the idea of the Obama era was multilateralism whenever possible and unilateralism only when necessary. So the Trump administration reversed this. Unilateralism whenever possible, being multilateral only if it is necessary. So that's might be a fundamental change, and so that the Democrats also would have a second look now on the JCPOA, the Iran deal. Trump now is also not only abandoning JCPOA, but he is increasing the war rhetoric towards Iran. I would not exclude that before the election, if there is no effective rally around the president, he might do a military intervention in Iran as well. So that's his second foreign scapegoat. So he's still building up tensions with Iran. So he's obsessed. So Democrats might reduce these tensions with Iran. Tensions will remain with Iran because there are historical reasons. So the hostilities in the region, Iran, Israel. There are the strong lobbies in the US which support or which are against Iran, even support military intervention, like the lobby, the AIPAC, the strong Israeli lobby, AIPAC, But there are other Jewish lobbies at the J Street, which are much more liberal, and the majority of them always vote for the Democrats. So the Democrats should look at the alternatives they have in domestically as well, not only APEC, but there are other groups as well. So Democrats could somehow reduce the tensions in the world, more multilateralism, less war rhetoric, and more cooperative strategies. So that would be the alternative I would see. So it's not, they're all Americans, right? The American interest for them is always first, but it depends whether the American interest can be embedded in the interests of the global world community, what Trump is not abdicated or basically altogether.
Okay, great. And then last question. So on that topic, do you think that the current sort of pandemic and the kind of push against globalization is resulting from this, do you think that could change American interests by either on domestic or foreign policy level, or do you think that things could kind of move back towards normal depending on who sort of takes the White House in November? The current crisis will bring changes in US policies, definitely. Changes means there are certain trends will be reinforced and others will be abandoned. So we can expect, if there's a change in the White House, that certain trends we have seen accelerated by the Trump administrations, more tensions, more inequality, more populism, rhetoric against all foreigners, immigrants, that this situation will be somehow reversed if there's a change in the White House. Not entirely, but these are issues which Trump used and now is using them even more. Just what I have heard today, that he has he imposed a stop on all immigrants, so that reinforced the trends, and he already criticized refugees and immigrants for certain crises. So they had this Muslim ban from citizens from majority Muslim countries were prohibited to come to the US. So, and this is now building up under his administration again. So I think if there's a change in the White House, this trend will not accelerate that much. So maybe to some extent it will be reversed. So we will have not an altogether different America, but to some extent it will be another America than the one we have seen the last 4 years. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Professor Gärtner. Thank you so much for taking the time to speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time. So.